Abigail here from Evening Star Astrology. I hope you're all doing well, staying healthy, staying safe. Today I have an astrology video for you, and we're going to chat about the big three. I feel like as a society we've progressed past like the what's your sign pickup line, and if you know anything about astrology, you'll ask people, what are your big three? So I'm going to chat about what the big three are, what they mean in your birth chart, how to calculate them, and why they are so significant. Like, why are these placements considered the big three? So, yeah, let's get into the video. So starting off, your big three are your sun, your moon, and your rising. So you're probably most familiar with your sun sign, which is what you would look for in a newspaper horoscope. For example, my birthday is December 3rd, so I'm a Sagittarius because Sagittarius season goes from November 21st to December 21st. And I just want to say that if your birthday is between like the 17th and the 23rd of a month, I think it's really important to look up your birth chart because the sun doesn't always move into a certain sign on the day that like the newspaper horoscope says it does. For example, this year the sun moved into Aries on March 20th, but newspapers will tell you that Aries season starts on March 21st. So that's just an example, but so if you're within that cusp range, I would recommend looking up your birth chart, actually calculating it, and that will tell you where your sun actually is. Next, the second of the big three is your moon sign. And the moon changes signs every like 2.5 days, so it's definitely more personal and more unique than your sun sign is because it just moves more quickly through the sky. And to calculate your moon sign, I'm going to leave a link down in the description box. I think that astro.com is the best website, like free website to calculate your birth chart. And based on your time and date of birth, you'll be able to figure out your moon sign. And the fun thing about the moon is that sometimes you can share a birthday with someone and your moon sign will be different than theirs. So when calculating your birth chart, for other reasons which I'll get into in a second, it's actually very important to know your exact time of birth because the moon can literally change signs in the middle of a day, and if your birth time is a couple hours off, you could think that you have one moon sign and you actually have a different one. And then finally, the third of the big three is your rising sign. And your rising sign is basically where the eastern horizon was at the time you were born. So for example, I was born at close to midnight, so my sun is at the bottom of my chart, and the eastern horizon is here. So I'm a Virgo rising because the sun, moves around, it rises in the east, sets in the west, and then it goes like under the earth. And so since my sun is down in the bottom part of my chart, the horizon's here, and that's where my rising sign is. I hope that made sense. I can go into more detail in a future video if you guys would like. So your rising sign is actually very, very important. I think it gets kind of downplayed in modern astrology, but in like ancient, like Hellenistic Greek astrology, your rising sign was your sign. Like the Greek word horoscopos is your rising sign. You wouldn't like no one cared about your sun sign. It was about what your rising sign is because it's completely relative to where your sun is in your birth chart. Anyway, your rising sign is very important. I might do a future video on why your rising sign is so important, but for now, let's get into what these three placements mean. All right, so before we get into the significations, I just want to tell you guys how to calculate your birth chart. I'm going to put a link down in the description box to astro.com. I personally think that it's the best free online tool to calculate your birth chart. It's the most accurate. I think it's pretty aesthetically pleasing, and there are a lot of different chart options. Like you can select if you want to do whole sign houses or Placidus, whatever you prefer. And in order to calculate your birth chart, you will need to know your time, date, and place of birth. I highly, highly recommend that you look at your birth certificate if you can, because parents' memories are not always the most accurate when it comes to birth times. And I also want to say, because I know there are a lot of people out there who don't know their birth time, either because they were adopted or they don't have access to it, or for one reason or another, they just don't know what time they were born. And I never want to shame anyone who doesn't know their birth time. You can still figure out most of your birth chart without your time of birth. You won't know your rising sign, but you can figure out almost everything else. And if you are really serious about astrology, there's this process called rectification, where an astrologer looks at significant events in your life and kind of works backwards from there to figure out your rising sign, if that makes sense. I'm getting a little bit off track here, but basically, for most people, calculating your birth chart is very easy. And I just also wanted to say that there's no shame in not knowing your birth time, and there are ways to work around it if you choose to do so. Anyway, on to the significations. So, starting with the sun again, your sun sign is your ego, your core sense of self, your vitality, and the sun also represents the body and the mind. So basically, like when someone asks, who are you? And you say, I am, that's mostly your sun sign talking. I also just want to mention that it's very important to know where your sun is in your birth chart, because that highlights an area that is extremely important to you, and it can be important in a good or bad way. It's just significant in one way or another, because the sun is the self, and then wherever that is, that's where you are most able to express yourself or feel most confident. The sun is also about confidence, and that can also very much change how your sun sign is expressed. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a Sagittarius sun, but my sun is in my 4th house. So I'm not your typical, I'm not like other girls. I'm not like that, like Sagittarius who's like out traveling the world and like being crazy or wild or whatever. But like my adventurous, independent, loving Sagittarius sun comes out most when I'm at home, when I feel comfortable, when I'm around my family. Up next, we have your moon sign. And so your moon sign is all about your emotions, your instincts, your core basic needs, like just feelings in general, and also how you connect with others on an emotional level. Is that easy for you? Is that challenging? Also, how do you feel your emotions? Are you a water sign, or is your moon in a water sign and do you just feel your emotions? Or is your moon in an air sign and you tend to intellectualize and process your emotions in a more logical or rational way? Just like your sun sign, it's very important to note where your moon sign is in your chart. The location of your moon sign is very important because it can change the expression of the planet. Like, is it in your 10th house? Are you very forthright with your emotions? Or is it in your 8th house and you're very secretive and private about your emotion? Your moon can also show like your energy level and your motivation. And although the sun tends to kind of cover more of like the external motivations, the moon sign is talking about what really drives you. What, like, on a deep, like almost soul type level, what really drives you. So your rising sign is the final of the 3. And your rising sign is so important. And I don't think I realized how important your rising sign was until I started studying Hellenistic astrology, because modern astrology like kind of downplays the significance of the rising sign. When I first started just studying astrology, I was studying more modern techniques, and I was like, oh yeah, the rising sign, it's kind of like how other people see you and how like you present yourself to the world. But it's truly much more than that. Your rising sign is how you approach the world, how you see the world, and how you like make sense of what's going on around you. If you have like a cardinal rising sign, you're going to be very action oriented. You're going to approach the world by taking action, by going for what you want, in whatever realm that is. If you have a mutable rising sign, you're going to approach the world in a very flexible way. You're going to be okay with like the unknown and changes. And if you have a fixed rising sign, you're going to approach the world with, your convictions, and you will know exactly what you want out of life, but you might not be willing to budge with others. Your rising sign can also demonstrate your personal expression, how you dress, how you present yourself to the world. And that's where modern astrology gets this right, is how, like, the face that you give the world is your rising sign. That is the first impression that you give off. Generally speaking, your rising sign is just very important because it dictates how you navigate the world, how you view the world, how you approach life, what choices you make, and then also to a lesser extent, the first impression that you give off, like your physical appearance and then also how other people view you based on the image that you give. Your rising sign is also important because the ruler of the sign that is your rising sign is the ruler of your ascendant. So for example, I'm a Virgo rising, and because of that, Mercury is the ruler of my ascendant. Some people say like the ruler of my chart. I think that there are like multiple, like according to the Hellenistic tradition at least, there are multiple ways to calculate like the ruler of the chart. And so to be more specific, Mercury is the ruler of my ascendant. So that means that Mercury is very important in my chart. And then that takes us down a whole nother spiral of what's important in the chart. But today we're just focusing on the big three. So basically, with the sun, moon, and rising, the reason that they're the big three is, it's your energy, your vitality, your mind and body as your sun. That's pretty important. That like gives a pretty good image of who you are as a person. And then your moon sign kind of clarifies that and explains, well, why are you the way you are? What motivates you? What drives you on an instinctual, emotional level? How do you feel? Not like, how do you feel? But like, how do you feel emotions? And how do you process the world around you? And then finally, your rising sign, once you've established your sun sign or the external part of yourself, and your moon sign or the more internal part of yourself, using that, like creating your personality based off of that, how do you use that to navigate the world? How do you approach the world? I think the big three are important because the rest of the planets get into more specific details, but if you know the big three, you can paint a pretty good picture of someone. You might not know exactly how they communicate or how they love or where they assert their confidence, but you will know generally the basics of their personality, what drives them, what motivates them, and how do they use that personality to navigate the world. How do they approach the world? What is important to them? For example, your other planets, as I mentioned, can kind of clarify other aspects of your personality and create a larger picture. But when most people look at you, they first see your rising sign, and then they will see your moon and sun, and how they supplement your rising sign. So I think that if you just meet someone, knowing their big three gives a pretty thorough, not complete, but a pretty adequate explanation of who they are, compared to just someone's sun sign. That's why I think it's really cool nowadays that people ask about your big three instead of just your sun sign, because your sun sign, of course, is important, like it's one of the big three, but your sun sign is not all of who you are, and your big three gives a much more well-rounded answer. Before I ever got into astrology, I actually didn't resonate with the practice at all, because I was like, well, I'm a Sagittarius sun and I don't relate to any of the descriptions about like my horoscope or any descriptions I've read about a Sagittarius sun. I am not like that at all. But then as I kind of looked into astrology a little bit more, I was like, oh, I have an Aquarius moon. That's probably why I don't like resonate very much with my sun sign. Like I really strongly resonate with the Aquarius moon description. And then I read more about being a Virgo rising and I was like, yeah, this is me. This makes a lot of sense. So that's just my personal experience, but I think that a lot of people get a lot more clarity and find more meaning in astrology. Also, I think the big three are important because like sun sign astrology is so limiting and it puts people in 12 boxes, and I think that a lot of people who are anti-astrology and don't believe in it are like, well, if there are only 12 personality types, like that's too limiting. And the big three kind of gives a little bit of a glimpse into the complexity and the richness and the detail that astrology provides. So with sun sign astrology, you are one of 12. Like there are 12 options and you are one of those 12. But with the big three, your sun, moon, and rising, there are 1,728 different combinations. And that alone opens up so many more possibilities, a much more complex and thorough approach to astrology. So yeah, once again, your big three are your sun, your moon, and your rising, your ego, identity, core sense of self, mind and body, your sun, your moon sign, your internal drive, motivation, emotions, instincts, and then your rising sign how you approach the world, how you navigate life, what you value, and the first impression that you give off. That's all I have for today. If you guys liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, comment down below, tell me what you thought of this, and subscribe. And if you have any questions about calculating your birth chart or what, clarifying questions about what this means if I didn't cover something that you had a question on, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or email me, or again, comment down below, and I would love to chat more about this. All right, bye guys.